Hello.
Hello.
Ready for
Do
more?
do you have a picture of the Queen in your house?
Yeah, yeah, I have two. Yes.
Why do you have a picture of the Queen?
I like the Queen.
What?
Well, first of all, I collect art, and I
Okay.
got I got them at very one's an Andy Warhol, and the other's by this artist Chris Levine. So it was a good price, and it's gonna be worth something. So
I was worried that maybe you're a Canadian or something.
no, 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 no. I used to go to London very often on business, and I was
Uh-huh.
always like, God, there's a queen here. There's actually a queen.
Wow. Okay. You don't have the king.
I do not have the king. No, I wish I had the princess.
Yeah. Don't we all?
Yeah. Oh, don't
Hello.
start. Don't start.
Don't don't fall asleep now.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
I think we're on 312,
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Use being mishtamish with eitzim, using trees on Shabbos. 312. Oh, and volume 20s are coming. I was told it was going to be here today, but it didn't come today. Hmm? Chazal prohibited because we were dealing, smelling fruits, walking on grass, watering plants, dealing with the outdoors. Chazal prohibited any use of trees on Shabbat out of concern that one may detach branches or leaves, thereby violating the malacha of kotzer. The prohibition includes either climbing or leaning on a tree, or even placing objects on a tree on Shabbat. The basic prohibition we find in a Mishnah Masechta Beitza, Eluhen Mishum Shvus. The following are prohibited rabbinically: V'lo olin be'ilan. You can't climb a tree. Masechta Beitza Lamed Vav Lo olin be'ilan gzera shemayitla. Why can't you climb a tree? We're concerned that as you climb, you're going to pull a branch off and you detach the branch. The Gemara Masechta Eruvin quotes a baraisa, which extends this prohibition to other uses of a tree. You have roots of a tree that break the ground and are 3 tfachim high. Let's say there is a space below the roots, 3 tfachim. On one side of the roots, it's sort of level with the ground. You cannot sit on those roots. It's considered that you climbed the tree. You can't hang from a tree, like with your hands. Grab onto a branch and hang. Can't do that. Ein nishanin be'ilan. You can't lean on a tree. V'lo yala be'ilan mibad yom, v'yeshuv sham kol hayom kulam. You can't climb the tree on Friday and be sitting there as Shabbos starts The Gemara discusses further whether one who climbed a tree may descend on Shabbat. Possible distinctions are suggested between one who climbed the tree before Shabbat but remained there on Shabbat, and one who climbed on Shabbat itself, and between one who knowingly transgressed the prohibition and one who did so unwittingly. So the Gemara goes through all these permutations. Tani Chada, Im Allah, that one brisa says that if you climbed, mutter leiri, you have a permission to go down. Tani Chada Arsuler, the other brisa says no. If you climbed, you're stuck. You got to stay there. Loi kasha, kami bod yom. The Gemara reconciles the two brises by saying the first case where it says that you're allowed to come down would be the case where you climbed the tree Friday afternoon and you were sitting there, then you realize it's a Shabbos, you can climb down. Kan mishachashecha. The brisa that prohibits you from climbing down is if you climbed up on Shabbos. You climbed up on Shabbos, it's in a sense, we give you a fine and we prevent you from climbing down in order to remind yourself not to do it in the first place. The Gemara's other approach is both cases are talking about you did it on Shabbos. It has to do with what your intent was. If you did not know that it was prohibited to climb the tree on Shabbat, then you'd be allowed to come down. If you knew that there was a prohibition and you did it b'mezid anyways, then we fine you and we prevent you from coming down. The Gemara goes even further. Both cases are talking about it happened on Shabbos, and both cases are talking about what you did it unwittingly. The machlokes is, do we find the person who did it b'shogeg so that he will stay away from doing it b'mezid? Mar Savar Kansinan. One brise's opinion was that yes, we give him the fine of not being able to come down on Shabbos because we want you to stay away from doing it. Mar Savar Lo Kansinan. The other opinion holds that there is no such fine. So the Rishonim rule that descending is permitted unless one knowingly transgressed and climbed the tree on Shabbat itself. Although according to the Tur, the same applies if one climbed the tree before Shabbat with intention to transgress by staying there on Shabbat. The Shulchan Aruch summarizes the halacha and quotes this dispute. Ein olin be'ilat. You may not climb a tree. Bein lach, bein yavich, whether it's wet or dry. Ve'ein nitlin, but you can't hang from it. Ve'ein mishtamshin b'mechuger lekarka klal. Anything that's connected to the ground, like a pole, they don't want you to use because gzeira shemayala v'yitlosh. You're going to climb up and pull something off. All be'ilim b'Shabbos. If you climb the tree on Shabbos, b'shogeg mutter leirei. If you did it unwittingly, you're allowed to come down. But mezid osur leirei. V'malami bod yom. If you climbed Friday afternoon, b'chol gavni mutter leirei b'mishachashecha. If you're still up in the tree when Shabbos comes, everyone agrees you can come down. However, that's if he had in mind when he climbed the tree Friday afternoon that he was going to come down before Shabbos. But if his intent was to climb up the tree and stay there on Shabbos, he's not allowed to come down. Because he knew it's prohibited. And he intended to stay there, even though it was prohibited. The Ramah clarifies that removing an object from a tree is prohibited on Shabbos, even if it was placed there before Shabbat. He adds that the entire prohibition does not apply to soft reeds, even if they are attached to the ground. Dav Gadim Sha'ala Sham. Aval Hiniach Sham Chafetz B'Vad Yom, you're not allowed to the leniency to climb down is if you actually climb the tree. Let's say Friday afternoon you place something in the tree. You can't take it out of the tree on Shabbos. That's a tree. But if it's a soft reed, you can use it. You can touch it. It's not a prohibition to touch that. The Mishnah Berurah adds some explanation of details of these halachos, including that the prohibition applies also to trees that have dried up. And there's a prohibition leaning and to placing items on a tree. The Mishnah Berurah quotes the Shochrach ben Yavish, Afilum kvar nisyavish lagamri, even though the tree is completely dried up. She'ein bo shum lachluchit, there's no moisture at all, klal. V'gam nashro lav anafav u'peirosav, all of its leaves and fruits have fallen off. The lo shaykh ba bo achar kach shum chashash tlisha. You would think there's nothing to be concerned that you're going to pull something off. Once they prohibited, they didn't make any kind of permission. Some say that it's permitted for a dry tree that's lost all of its branches and leaves. Everyone knows that it's dry, so it's not a problem. Ein nitlin, you can't hang from a tree, but you can't lean on it. You can't place an object on a tree, or to take something off the tree, or to tie an animal to a tree. Has to be attached to the ground. Has to be at least 3 tvachim above the ground. And you may not remove something asr litlo. You may not place on a tree on Friday afternoon items that you're allowed to use on Shabbos. But the problem is you're putting it in the tree. You're going to come and take them down on Shabbos, and you're going to violate the prohibition. What is the halacha if an older child or adult intentionally climbs into a tree? They're aware that it's prohibited to do so on Shabbat, and then wishes to come down. Is there any way to permit him to descend despite the prohibition? Rav Ovadia Yosef and others, the Nishmas Shabbos, the Piskei Teshuvos, write that a child even close to bar mitzvah age may be instructed to descend from the tree, as Chazal did not enact such penalties against minors. A child close to bar mitzvah, he knows it's prohibited to climb a tree, but he went ahead anyways. You can tell him to come down. A cotton that's not chayv mitzvahs, the knas doesn't apply by him. The Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa quotes Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach suggesting that even with respect to an adult, although climbing down from the tree is prohibited, jumping down in one action may be permitted. Shomati Ma'aragon Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. The Mekevan Shebe'erevin Daf Kuf Omid Aleph. Mazbir Rashi B'dibra Maschul Im Allah. The Chol Derech Yiridaso Mishtamish B'Mechuber. If climbing down, he's using the tree, Afshar, to Gris Achas Yamutu Likfotz Milan. So maybe with one jump from the tree to the ground, that could be permitted. Even the Gambi Yeshivato Ilan, who over the Isser, he's violating in this every minute he's sitting in the tree. And now you're telling him not to move from there. Better to jump off. If he sat on a branch above 3 tvachim, you might think that you should be chayiv to get up. That's what Shlomo Zalman said. The Pnei Shabbos offers another leniency, that if the individual needs to relieve himself or is feeling unwell, he may descend from the tree on Shabbos. If there's a concern that he may fall asleep and fall and injure himself, So then we would permit him to come off the tree. What about using a tree indirectly? We've seen so far that it's prohibited to use a tree on Shabbos in a direct manner. Does this include using a tree indirectly? The Gemara Masechta Shabbos discusses whether one may use the sides of an animal or tree, such as a ladder that is supported by a tree, or the side of the sides, such as a ladder supported by stakes that are attached to a tree. The Gemara concludes that using the sides is prohibited, but the side of the side is permitted. V'hilchasat studying the side asurin, tzideit studying mutar, the side of the side. Amar Ravashi, hashta damrit studying asurin, high darga de madla. Now that you say the side is prohibited, that a ladder you shouldn't lean the ladder on a palm tree. Davalut studying, it's considered that you're using the side of the tree. There are some stakes that are not connected to the trunk of the palm tree, so you can put the ladder there. And v'chisalik, if he climbs the ladder, lo linich kare agvoy, you shouldn't climb up those stakes that are in the ground first. Ella litnich akinyan. You should only use the rungs of the ladder, because you shouldn't use the sides of the tree. You can see the picture on the bottom of 317. Well, we'll see that later. The Shulchan Aruch codifies these halachas. The Ramah adds that touching a tree is permitted. Asur lishtamish b'tzadei ilu. You can't use the sides of a tree. Aval b'tzidei tzadei mutar. Lefichach asur lismach hasulam l'tzadei ilu. You may not lean a ladder on the side of a tree. Because if you climb that ladder, you're going to be using the side of the tree. Look at the picture on the bottom of 317. Someone knocked a stake into the side of the tree, and the ladder is leaning against that stake. That you can put the ladder. The stake is the side. The sulam and the ladder is the tzidei tzad. If you put a stake there and you put a basket hanging from the stake, so the stake is you couldn't use directly, but the basket you'd be able to use. Says the Ramah, you're allowed to touch a tree, but don't move it. So the Orchos Shabbos provides several practical applications of these halachas, such as removing a ball from a tree, leaning a ladder on a tree, hanging a hammock on a tree. In the latter two cases, one may lean or hang them on another item that is supported indirectly by the tree. You may not put any object in a tree on Shabbos or hang something from its branches. You may not remove from a tree objects that have been placed in the tree. You think that just removing the object, you're not really using the tree. It's a gzeira. The Chachamim were worried that by removing an object, you might lean on it. The lava al isri shtabshus, you're going to come to use the tree. Min ha'amur, that from which has been said. Nilmad shim nafal beged or kadur b'Shabbos lagabe ilan. If a garment or ball fell on a tree, asur l'sirivim, you can't remove it. Beinim nishan begufo be'ilan, whether he leans his body on it when he's removing it, beit asar l'chafetz, uveinim einon nishan ke. Shum se'etzem asar l'chafetz men asur. The actual removal of the item from the tree is prohibited. Even Erev Shabbos, you may not put items in a tree. We're concerned you're going to remove it on Shabbos. You'll be violating this prohibition. Magavat al gabi ilan. Don't hang a towel. Mechashash shema yitlena b'Shabbos. You might remove it. These are items that are permitted to use on Shabbos. You might take them. But something that's muktzah. You're not. Let's say it was put there erev Shabbos. That's okay because it's muktzah. You wouldn't come to take it. Here is the illustration on the bottom. If the item was on the tree from before Shabbos, the Shmir Shabbos, it's entirely muktzah on Shabbos. And even if one mistakenly removed from the tree on Shabbos, it's forbidden to use. It should be noted that Rav Vosner discussed the possibility that if an item fell or was blown onto the tree, there may be grounds to remove it in certain cases. Back to the Orcha Shabbos in his continuation. Regarding a dry tree, Ilan Yave Shein Bo Shum Lachluchis. You have a dry tree, no moisture. V'nashru alav anafav u'peirosav. All of its branches, leaves, and fruit have fallen off. Ve'ein bo chashash tlisha. Therefore, there's no concern that you're going to pull anything off the tree. Mikol makom asur lalis bo lishtamish bo k'shai lonis. You may not use it. Kshem shasur lishtamish begufot shalilan. Just like you can't use the trunk of the tree. Kein asur lishtamish b'tzadei ilan, the sides of it. Danu b'dvarman itfalim le'ilan, things that are secondary to the tree. Lachein asur litlos beged b'Shabbos b'mesamer hanoutz b'ilan. You can't hang a garment on a nail or stake that's been rammed into the tree from Erev Shabbos. Lachein asur lasirim, you can't remove the beged. Lachein asur lalos b'sum anisham b'ilan, you can't climb a ladder that is leaning on a tree. If you have a clothesline and the string is tied to the tree, you can't hang any clothes on it. Or if you tied a hammock to a tree, you can't lie on the hammock. Mutter lishtamish b'tzidei study, but the side of the side, like we showed, if you leaned a ladder on that stake that was driven into the tree, then you can climb the ladder. No. Susie asked me, one of our kids had a swing hanging from a tree. So based on this, if it's hanging directly from the tree, it would be a problem. Now, if you hammered a stake into the tree and the swing was hung from that stake, that would be tzidei study, and that would be okay. Just like we said, if you lean the ladder, so if the swing would have been hung from this stick, that's a way to make it permissible. So if you hang your clothesline and you tie it to a stake that is driven into the tree, if the hammock is not tied directly to the tree, but to a stake in the tree, that would be permitted. You could go up a ladder. All of these permissions to use these things is if the tree doesn't move when you use it. If it causes movement of the tree, you wouldn't be able to use even the tzidei stud. Okay. What about potted plants? We already seen above that detaching anything that grows from the ground is prohibited on Shabbos under Kotzer. A Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos, the Tanoim dispute whether detaching something that grows in a perforated plant pot is included in this malacha on a biblical level. We're talking about a flower pot that has a hole in it on the bottom and it's connected to the ground. If it's got a hole in it, it's considered as if the plant in the pot is connected to the ground. And therefore, if you pull something off of the potted plant, you'd be chayiv for kotzer. But the she'ena nokov potter, if the flower pot didn't have a hole in it on the bottom, and you pulled something, you would not be chayiv a kores. Potter means you're not chayiv kores, doesn't allow you to do it. Rav Shimon poiter b'zeh v'zeh. Rav Shimon said even a perforated flower pot, you'd be potter. But the halacha follows the Tanakama, that one who picks from a perforated plant pot on Shabbos violates a biblical malacha. The Rambam explains that a perforated plant pot is considered equivalent to the ground. But if you pulled something from an unperforated pot, you're potter, and they change the makam gidulo. It's not really the place that it grows from. But otzitz nokov b'chdei shorish cotton areu ko ke'eretz vatolish men chayiv. If the hole in the bottom of the pot is the size of a small root, then it's as if the thing was planting in the ground, and you'd be chayiv for pulling it. Now, throughout Hilchos Shabbos, potter implies that even though there's no biblical violation, the action is nevertheless prohibited rabbinically. If so, then in this case as well, it would be forbidden, midrabanan, to detach from an unperforated plant pot on Shabbos. And this is confirmed. Also, little shafil min atfitin enokim. The Shulchan Aruch says you can't pull something from a plant even in a flower pot. The Mishnah Berurah discusses the case of a perforated plant pot and explains further why detaching from a perforated plant pot is a biblical violation. He adds that this applies even if the hole is in the side of the pot, on the same level as the soil in the pot. In a perforated plant, there's still a chiyuv. It is deriving nutrients from the ground, from the hole. It gets moisture from that hole. I feel my anekev cotton, even if it's so small, only a hole big enough for one root, which is pachos mikazayis, it would be prohibited. It doesn't have to be in the bottom, even if it's on the side. As long as the hole is even with the dirt that's in the pot. Certainly, if the hole is at the bottom next to the roots, it's certainly prohibited. Some materials are inherently considered perforated due to their porousness, even if no artificial hole has been made in them. The Bir Halacha cites a dispute regarding which materials fall into this category. V'dash t'bechoshet mishpat siman reish beis, muvam machloket yeshomim devatzitz eitz. If you have a pot made out of wood, afilu eina nekuva kinekuva damya. Even if it doesn't have a hole, it's considered porous enough that it's considered like a hole. Mishum de'etz mitlachlach the yonek me'akarka. Wood absorbs moisture, and it derives nourishment from the ground. V'lo be'ina nekuva. Only a earthenware pot do we actually need, like a clay pot, do we actually need a hole. Some say just the opposite. A clay pot doesn't need any hole because it's porous, just like we know you can't kasher something clay because it absorbs. So the Orchos Shabbos, the distinction between earthenware and wood pots first appear in the Gemara. Rashi explains that earthenware is porous where wood is not. But Tosfos argues the reverse. So the Orchos Shabbos says, Mateches mafsekes es hayanik. Metal stops moisture from absorption. Lachein otzit shel mateches. If you have a metal pot, shein bo nekev, without a hole, nidin keinu nekev. It's treated as if it's not nekev. Plastic, kashiach, hard plastic, Some say it's like metal. And therefore it doesn't absorb. Some say to be stringent. We don't know for sure to what type of material we should compare it to. To thick plastic sheets. The same doubt. Ritzpat shayish, marble floor. O even TV, the natural stone floor. Ritzpat avanim Yerushalmiyot, like Jerusalem stone. That mafsikin is sayanuka. There is no flow of fluid. Amnam nirashim nikr la'ayin sha even rakav v'sofeges mayim. If we see that the stone absorbs water, then any mafsek is sayanika. Then it doesn't stop the flow of nutrients. It would be a problem. Yitzikas beton, concrete, umeritzpos beton, floors made out of cement. Einan mafsikas sayanuka. They can get wet. Achazoni shor degam meritzpos regilot. Shemaratzrim bahem esabayis, regular house tiles. Also, fluid flows there. They're made from like a powder. Venira duadin rispas karmika, ceramic floor. Has a very thin glass layer. It's mainly earthenware, so all of these are problematic. The Gemara Masechta Shabbos teaches that moving a perforated plant away from the ground violates the prohibition against detaching from the ground, whereas placing it on the ground violates the prohibition against planting. So a perforated plot that's on the ground, you can't touch on Shabbos. Picking it up is like you pulled something out, and putting it down is like you planted it. Masechta Shabbos Peyala. By the way, look at the footnote of 15. Many poskim disagree, maintain that all solid floors obstruct the flow of nutrients. Thus, a potted plant inside the house would never be considered attached to the ground. Amar Abaya, parpisa, that's a potted, perforated plant, perforated pot. Oil vasily done, because we're discussing about it. Lema beimils, I'm going to say halach. Hayamunach lagabi karka. If it was on the ground, vinich lagabi yasedos, and you lifted it up to put it on stakes, mechayv mishum tolish, you're chayv for pulling, like for pulling something out of a tree. And vice versa, hayamunach lagabi yatedos, if it was on stakes, vinich lagabi karka, chayv mishum notead. You can move that. That's on a table. And that's not perforated. Yes, of course you can move that. There also, if you pulled something out of it, you wouldn't be chayiv koretz. He said it's potter. Rashi explains that although Gemara uses the language of liability, implying a biblical violation, the language is imprecise. And in fact, moving a plant pot from and to the ground is only rabbinically proven. You detached it and it's not benefiting from the ground. It's not that you're chayv midaraisa, it's like a gzeira. But the Rambam disagrees. Writing explicitly, one who moves a plant pot from or to the ground is liable. Gav shushit shel afar, sha'alu bo asavim. You have a clod of earth and there's some grass there, and you lifted it, and you put it on stakes. Vice versa, if it was on stakes, we learned above that even plucking from an unperforated plant is prohibited on a rabbinic level. The Shulchan Aruch rules that even moving an unperforated plant from it to the ground is prohibited. Even if the pot is not perforated, you should be careful to pull it from the ground, put it on stakes or ibcha, whether it's wood or clay. The Orchos Shabbos gives us a summary. You have a potted plant with a hole in it. You cannot put it on the ground. That meaning, if it's resting on the ground, you can't put it and suspend it in the air, or vice versa. You're reducing its nourishment. When you place it where something obstructs between it and the ground, such as the flow of nutrients obstructed, that's prohibited. You can't lift a pot that's on the floor, plastic, put it on a piece of plastic, or we would think that since it's on a floor, it's pulling in nutrients through the moisture of the floor. Now you put it on plastic, so don't move it. If it's the plant is on the ground, or hanging, also you can't remove it. Put it on the floor. Maybe the floor is preventing absorption. You can't lift a pot even temporarily. To put it down. When you lift it, you're reducing its nourishment. If you lifted it, you can't put it back. You're improving its nourishment. You can't put it down on a place that's obstructing it. He says, if you picked it up, you got to stand it like a klutz for the rest of Shabbos. You can drag a pot. You're not lifting it. You can drag a pot that's on stakes. You're not removing, you're not changing its height. Both the Piskei Teshuvos and the 39 Melachos advise not moving any pots on Shabbos to avoid any potential issue. According to many poskim, live plants are muktzah and may not be moved or handled in any case. Some poskim, however, permit the handling of plants where doing so would not improve their growth. Because of this controversy and other halachic problems associated with moving plants, it's advisable not to move or handle any plants unless absolutely necessary. Placing flowers in water. Hang on. This is going to go on.
Right, you have to untwist it because it didn't work last.
Okay. Placing flowers in water. Another issue related to plants and vegetation sometimes arises on Shabbos pertains to placing flowers in water. To understand the background, let us look at the following Gemara Masechtas Vachim, which states that one who places flax seeds in water on Shabbos is liable to bring a chatas. The Gemara concludes that the malacha transgressed is lash, kneading, not zareya, as Zareya would apply to any grain, not just to flax seeds. The Omer of a Zark Pishtan Lamayim, you threw flax seeds into water, Chayiv. What about Zera Pishtan? What about the seeds? My time. Maybe because it's planting. What about wheat and barley? So Hanech Islu Riri. Throwing the flax itself into water is not prohibited of planting, but the flax seeds discharge when they're soaked. Yachish l'chaim nami. Shlachai means watercress, not hides. I don't know what they're talking about, hides. So hasum kavid lisha, because with the flax seeds you need. I have to send Rav Daron. I don't think that was translated properly. The Gemara appears to say that placing wheat or barley grains in water is not biblically prohibited. However, the Rambam writes that soaking wheat or barley in water is a violation of Zoreya. If you throw wheat or barley into water, Areza told us Zoreya. This ruling would appear to run contrary to the Gemara, a difficulty that was raised in the Rambam's lifetime. The Rambam resolved this difficulty in a tshuva, explaining that although no malacha was performed immediately when placing grain in water, leaving the grain to soak for an extended period of time is a violation of the Told of Zoreya. He explains further that facilitating any sprouting is prohibited as a Told of Zoreya, even if the seed will not be able to reach full growth. In this aspect, Zoreya is different than the malach of detaching, which is prohibited only when detaching something from the ground, where it would have been able to grow fully. Says the Tshuvas Rambam, Al ma'amarenu ashor chiti mosa'orim v'chayotz b'mamayim. On my statement that if you soak wheat or barley in water, it's a tolda of zera chayiv. Amar ba'arash kaga. It's a mistake. If you plant it in an unperforated potter, the koshkin shor verich b'zev hiki zeret litlosh. This response was written to Rabbeinu Yosef Umaravi in response to a list written by Rosh Hashiva named Rosh Shmuel Shatz, who disputed some of the Rambam's ruling. He says, "Hu b'kitzur hu lashon hatamid b'gmor zvachim, ta'amar of a zorak zera pishtan l'mayim chayiv." If you threw seeds of flax into water, you're chayiv. Zara pishtan my time. Why? Imishun demakteikach planting afilu chitis orinami. Why? What's wrong? You would be chayiv if you throw wheat and barley, but the Gemara says you're not chayiv for that. Ela mishum lisha. So the seeds has to do with kneading. Kloimar. Imishum tzmicha. So we're worried because they're growing. Rotzulomar sheyigdal v'yin boat. It'll sprout. Lama yichad zera pishta. Why only flax? Kol azroim will do the same thing. All seeds. Im noshu atzhem gadlim arehu zereya. So you'd be chayiv for planting. Mishum kachomar. We're not talking about that he has kavana that they should grow. Ella al divuka, he's trying to stick it together like making flour, and there you're chay mishum lash. That's why I emphasize shora means leaving to soak for a long time. You can't compare it to pulling something out of a pot. That's like you're pulling something from a tree. We're not waiting until it grows fully. Once there's a little bit of growth, it's already a problem. And the Shulchan Aruch rules like the Rambam. The Ramah adds that similarly placing tree branches in water is prohibited on Shabbos if they have flowers attached that could open up. You soak wheat and barley, or any other seeds in water. It's like a tolda of seeding. The Ramah, you can place tree branches in water on Shabbos. As long as there's no flowers, or blooming. They'll open up from this moisture. To better understand the Ramah's opinion, is reference to Siman 654. Let us offer some background. In addition to the issue of Zoreya, another potential issue with placing branches in water on Shabbos, even when no sprouting is caused, appears in Mishnah Masechta Sukkah. The Mishnah discusses returning a lulav to water and adding and replacing water on Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Cholet, and Cholamoid. The Kabelas Isha Miyad Benau Miyad Baila. A woman can take a lulav from her son or from her husband, and put it back in the water. On Shabbos, you can return it only. Beyond of Moisim, you could add water. If you want machlif, you could even change the water. The poskim all assume that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, as he merely adds to the words of the Tanna Kamma, does not disagree. Thus, changing the water is prohibited on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and adding fresh water is permitted on Yom Tov, but prohibited on Shabbos. Rabbeinu Chananel explains that adding fresh water is prohibited on Shabbos because it resembles watering seeds. Amayan moisif in mayim b'Shabbos mishum denira keshemashkas roim b'Shabbos. Look like you're irrigating seeds. Rashi explains differently that adding water is prohibited because this involves effort for the purpose of preserving the lulav, which is like tikkun mana, repairing a utensil. B'Shabbos machzirin sharimikan natlu mayom. They removed the lulav that day, they're returning it that day. Avalo mosifin man, you don't add water. And kol sheken shemachlivim, you don't change the water. Lishpoch l'seiv l'ter achem tzonimani. The tarach l'tikunimane, it's too much tircha, too much trouble to correct the kli. These halachas are in Shulchan Aruch Siman 654, referenced by the Ramah. The Mishnah Berurah explains that the Ramah references these halachas because the Shulchan Aruch there only permits returning a lulav to water into which it has been placed previously, but one may not add water or change it. The Mishnah Berurah notes that since the Shulchan Aruch there only addresses returning a lulav to the water it was in previously, the permissibility of placing a branch in water prepared before Shabbos for the first time is unclear and is disputed by the Achron. Ritzono Loma, the Sham of Wardein Mutter b'Shabbos there by a lulav was only permitted kim lachzer b'mayim sha'amdu bo. You can only return it to the water that was there before, Me'erev Shabbos. You can't add more cold water. You can't change the water. That which was written before, the mutter lamidon, that it was permitted to return it. Can't put it there in the first place, but you can return it. Some Achronim say that the Shulchan Aruch allows you to put it directly into water in the first place. As long as the water was prepared Erev Shabbos. You can't add water. Susie said she thought the lulav was muktzah. The lulav is muktzah on Shabbos. It says machziraso l'mayim b'Shabbos. If her husband gave her the lulav, she can put it in Shabbos on water. Let's see this footnote. The Gemara explains that it was necessary for the Mishnah to teach that a woman may move a lulav despite not being obligated in the mitzvah. Susie's right. The Mishnah speaks of the time when the lulav was taken on Shabbos. Today's lulav is muktzah on Shabbos, may not be moved by anyone. So this was the time when they were doing the lulav on Shabbos. It was only later on that they made exam.
Nobody puts a lulav in water.
Some people, to preserve it, put a lulav in water. I don't. No, it just... The Orchos Shabbos summarizes the practical halacha concerning placing flowers in water on Shabbos. Regarding the dispute quoted by the Mishnah Berurah, he rules leniently and permits placing branches or flowers in pre-prepared water for the first time on Shabbos, as long as the flowers don't open. If you're going to put either tree branches or flowers in water on Shabbos, יש להבחין בזה בין שני אופנים. אם יש בענפים אלו פרחים עתידים להתפתח מכוח המים. If you know that there are flower that's going to bloom and open by being exposed to water, אין ליטן במים בשבס. משום שיש בזה איסר זרע. There's like a prohibition of planting. ואפילו כבר היו ענפים האלו בתוך המים, מבעוד יום. Let's say these flowers were in there on Friday and they fell out. The nafal chutz usher, you cannot return them on Shabbos. Anafim shein behem prachim atidim lipatech. But if you have branches that there's no flowers that are going to open. Ein litin otam b'mayim b'Shabbos mishum iser tircha b'Shabbos. You can't do it because of tircha. V'im kvar hayu netunim b'toch mayim. But if they were there, v'nitlu mehem muter lalzir. If someone removed it, you could put it back. If these types of branches were brought from Friday, you forgot to put it in water before Shabbos. You can be lenient if there's already a kli with water in it, but if there was no kli, you can't put water in the kli, that's too much. Rav Ovadia Yosef argues that as long as no flowers will open, it's permitted to add and replace water on Shabbos. He cites the tshuva of the Rashba, who writes that the prohibition against adding water applies only to a lulav, which has no use on Shabbos other than for the mitzvah. He claims that those achronim who ruled stringently in this regard did not see the full tshuva of the Rambam, despite the Shulchan Aruch ruling in accordance with the Rashba that one may water a detached vegetable to prevent it from drying out. In Yechavedas, he says, Sheila, imuter latet b'Shabbos. I'm going to read this in English. Is it permitted to place a bunch of flowers or fragrant branches in a vase containing water so they don't dry up? In a tshuva of the Rashba, he was asked regarding a ruling given by one of the colleagues prohibited watering a vegetable detached from the ground so that it should not dry up. The colleague of the Rashba brought a proof from the Mishnah where they only permitted returning a lulav to water on Shabbos. It's only a lulav, but not placing it in water for the first time on Shabbos. The Rashba responded that the words of this colleague do not appear correct, as they only prohibited regarding a lulav, chazal, because it's only appropriate to move it on Shabbos for the purpose of the mitzvah. The halacha would not have permitted moving it even on Yontif. And Yerushalmi in Sukkah there explains that after one has let go of it, after fulfilling its mitzvah, it's muktzah. Therefore, we're talking about a lulav. Therefore, they only permitted moving it and returning to one on Shabbos and adding one on Yontif in order to beautify the mitzvah. But regarding a vegetable which may be eaten on that day, you can water it. So from here we learn a correct and clear distinction. This is Rav Ovadia speaking, that they only prohibited placing a lulav in water for the first time on Shabbos because moving it is not appropriate. But regarding tree branches which were ready from before Shabbat and are permitted for use for smelling them and the like, it's permitted to place them in water for the first time on Shabbos, since moving them is permitted. The Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the Rashba that watering and detached vegetables so it should not dry up is permitted on Shabbos. Therefore, it appears that it's also permitted to place water in the vase in order to place fragrant branches in it. And since it is appropriate to smell them, and it is permitted to move them, there's no prohibition against making an effort to bring water, place in a vessel, and place the branches in it so they will not dry up. Just as the Rashba differentiates with good reason. The Prima Godim and the Gra, Rav Shneur Zalman of Ladi were stringent in this regard. And Shvitat Shabbos Mishnah Berurah were also stringent. They hadn't seen the previous words of the Rashba, and they compared the halach of plants to lulav. But once the words of the Rashba have been discovered, it appears that the difference between these halachas is great, and they're not comparable. But again, he does not put regarding flowers and roses whose flowers are closed, and they open water, placing them in a vase containing water for the first time on Shabbos is not appropriate. And even if one removed them on Shabbos in order to smell them, one should not return them to the vase. But if the roses and flowers are already open, placing them in a vase containing water is permitted on Shabbos. One who is stringent regarding roses that have already been opened will get a brach. Let's finish with a machshava. We learned in the Shir that it is forbidden to remove an object placed in a tree on Shabbos. An amazing story is told by Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon, but Rav Yaakov Yisrael Kanievsky, the Stipler Rav, in connection with his personal sacrifice to observe this halach. Harav ne'elatz liot chayal b'tzava Rusi. Rav Kanievsky was forced to serve as a soldier in the Russian army. One of the Shabbos there was snow. They were given a special, like a fur coat. With the coat, they could tolerate, the guard duty. When the Rav came to the place where we had to do the Shmirah, the previous guard had left. The previous guard had hung this heavy coat on a tree. You're not allowed, we learned tonight, you can't remove it. He decided not to remove it. It became very cold. He thought in his mind, maybe it's a sakon in the fashos, I should take the coat. We already learned that removal of the coat is only a nisr rabbanu. Maybe we could be lenient. I'm going to wait another 5 minutes. That's not going to happen in 5 minutes. He wanted to take the coat. All of Shabbos went by, but Rav lo harid me'il min ha'etz. Rav Rimon notes that certainly according to halacha, one may clearly violate rabbinic prohibition in a case such as this. But he concludes that this story illustrates Rav Kanievsky's Mesiras Nefesh for Shabbos and the extent that we must strive to observe every detail of the halachot of Shabbat.
Yeah, Ernie, read the footnote. Read the footnote.
In fact, it is reported that due to this incident, Rav Kanievsky became hard of hearing for his entire life. Had he realized that, perhaps he would have removed the coat.
Interesting.
Questions, comments, or Hera wrote. Okay, next week, volume 20. I should have them. So either everyone can come or we'll try to distribute them once I get them. Okay?
Okay, go ahead.
Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Thank you.